Welcome to the final act of the Festival of Fundraising with Dublin City PPN. I'm Kevin Delaney from Academy Spirit Workshop, and I am delighted to have spent the whole week with all of the organizations throughout Dublin City, through the clinics, through the workshops, through all the different events. It's been awesome, and it's just been fantastic to meet so many great people and so many great organizations. We are going to finish up with a panel discussion with some awesome fundraisers. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed with the people that we've got on the panel, but we're just going to have a little chat with everybody and just kind of get a sense of their own fundraising journey, what brought them into this crazy field, I suppose, and got them here, and maybe some of the biggest mistakes that they've made, because I know I've certainly made some big ones, and maybe even just get some advice that particularly as they pass on, and particularly with the mind on a lot of the people who will be watching this are in smaller organizations and community groups, and it's that kind of the piece of advice that we can pass on to the kind of the smaller organizations from some of our experience. So we'll start off. I'll just actually get everyone to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your role and anything else that you want to say to us. So Sinead, can you say hello and introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Sinead Christian. I work with the Irish Wheelchair Association. I'm the head of fundraising, and Irish Wheelchair Association runs services for people with disabilities across community service, in independent living. We have sports clubs all over the country, and we also are the providers of parking permits, but one of the biggest aspects of our work is our advocacy work, which is, I suppose, tackling discrimination and being an enabler in terms of ensuring that people in power that can make decisions will consider people with disabilities in, for example, things like budgets, all those kind of bits and pieces that happen in the corridors of power in Leinster House.
And if Sinead nods off during the session, we know she's just finished a very successful fundraising day, so we'll excuse her if we find her asleep on her keyboard in a few minutes. Sinead. Helen, can you go next, please?
Yeah, of course. Hello, my name is Helen Mcveigh. I'm Director of Fundraising at Irish Hospice Foundation. So we're a national organisation working in all matters of dying, death and bereavement. We run a number of direct services for people at end of life and those coping with grief. So our biggest service would be Nurses for Night Care, where we bring nurses into people's homes so they can say a farewell in their own homes rather than in hospitals or nursing homes, whatever. But we also work very closely with hospitals and with nursing homes, because we're trying to bring hospice care into all the places where they're needed, not just the individual hospices. We also run a helpline, and we have advocacy training, education programs as well, to empower people who work on the front line to be able to work in their fields successfully and the best they can, to make sure that we're all getting the best end of life care that we'll all need one day. And in terms of our fundraising, we started in the 1980s. So we've been working as a charity for over 35 years. And up until very recently, we were completely funded by our voluntary income. Over the last couple of years, so the last 6 or 7 years, we've started to get small pieces of state funding alongside of our voluntary funding, but we are still heavily dependent on our in-house fundraising and our supporters around the country.
Thanks, Helen. And if I continue clockwise on my screen, Frances is up next. So, hi, Frances.
Thanks, Kevin. Nice to see you again.
And you.
Thank you. My name is Frances. I'm the Organisation Development Officer with Dublin City Volunteer Centre. So our office is based in Angel Street, and our role is to support all the kind of organisations who involve volunteers in the Dublin City area. So we are kind of like a go-between or a matchmaker, if you like, bringing volunteers and organisations together to help organisations in whatever way they need to deliver their services or build capacity, sit on a board or whatever the case may be. But particularly, I know from tonight, we're looking at sort of fundraising, so maybe volunteers to help with fundraising. So that might be on the street with a bucket, or it could be taking part in an event, or it could be maybe helping an organisation to plan or deliver a plan of activity during the year for fundraising. So that would be what we're about. So my role is to support you guys, the organizations who need those volunteers, and to help you, whether it's write a role description or advertise for volunteers. So we have the eyeball national database where we can advertise the role, and then people will be able to see your opportunity and apply for it. So that's pretty much it.
I have to say that the volunteer centre has saved my backside on many occasions over the years. So you're a much needed resource that we all rely on. So that's great. And Carrie, you're up last.
Hi everybody, I'm the head of fundraising for Sperassi. Sperassi is the National Centre for Victims of Torture. We're a national charity. We're based on North Circular Road over in Phibsborough in Dublin. Our messaging and our client base and everything that we do is based entirely around clients who and service users who aren't from Ireland. So our clients are refugees and asylum seekers who have come into this country who need specific and very dedicated and wraparound care, if you like, because they've been survivors of torture. We always say torture is something that happens at a fixed point in time, but the life of somebody in their recovery and their kind of rehabilitation is ongoing, and it takes many, many years. The way we do it is through therapy, medical care, and assistance through psychosocial supports, as well as befriending. We're heavily reliant on volunteers. And in fact, we started as a volunteer organisation back in 1999. Just a group of people came together at the start of the refugee crisis, really, the first kind of movement around that late 90s time, to get to know people. And refugees were coming with no English language skills, no accommodation very often. And they just needed help filling in forms, really. And this was a place of safety, a small meeting room where people would get cups of tea. From there, it's grown into what we are now, which is one of the state providers of this type of care. I'd say, our fundraising has grown exponentially in the last 3 or 4 years, and we're primarily trusts and grants and, that type of sort of funding applications heavy. But we've been really lucky and had some great kind of unrestricted income things. But again, it was interesting to go through this week and talking about fundraising, and that this is a piece we're still trying to grow. This is something, there's certain things we've never tried, certain things we can never try. And a lot of that's to do with, the client base that we serve.
Cool. It was actually, you're talking, hearing the three of you speak actually reminded me of something from the session last night. Now, if I had have had your name, had had my brain together, I would have used your examples. But the conversation came around, how some causes are easier to raise money for than others, and that there are some subjects that aren't talked about and those kind of things. And obviously, Carrie, in your case, that's kind of probably more relevant. But the point I was making was that, at one stage, disability wasn't spoken about, and at one stage, like people like dying of illness wasn't spoken about, and it's only through organizations working for 30 and 40 years that it's become okay to talk about how hospice care, or or even to celebrate people in wheelchairs and celebrate people with disabilities. It's actually the work, and I always think that's someone that's part of the opportunity that sometimes we fail as fundraisers to actually tell that story, that it's actually all those euros in buckets that changes conversations, because it gives strength to the organizations. And it just, like, listening to the three of you talking, I was like, oh wow, it's like, what an amazing thing society does. It's just it kind of gives me all goose pimples anyway. So I'm happy I can go home now. I'm happy. So but yeah, it just struck me talking to you. Okay, so like if we all kind of we'll share maybe some of our own how we ended up here, because again, I think lots of people and particularly in the community groups and kind of stuff, they often kind of ask themselves, how did we get here? How on earth did I all of a sudden end up on a committee with trying to build a centre or run a project? And I never thought I'd end up here. And I think probably even for all of us it was the same. I know I can share my complete training and introduction as a fundraiser was I had been working in kind of community organizations and in promotion and stuff like that, but I got a 10-week contract in the Irish Cancer Society because that's all they were allowed to give, because there was a labour dispute going on at the time and who knows what else was going on. And I was introduced to a couple of people in the fundraising team, and literally the head of fundraising said, there's your desk, do something. that was it. That was all I got. I was handed a big ring binder of people's names and names that had to be called for that all day. But my entire introduction was, "There's your desk, do something." And I've been in this world for, I don't know, 17 years or something since. So I don't know. I don't know what sort of punishment I was looking for, but that was how I ended up where I am. So maybe Helen, do you want to share your origin story? It's like a Marvel movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll try not. It's long. It's all I've done is fundraising. So there's many years. But
okay, hold on. We put the kettle on.
Brief. Yeah, exactly. I promise to be brief. I fell into the charity sector, I suppose, but I, going way back when I left college, I was interrailing and I didn't know what I was going to do when I got back home. I'm from England, I'm from Devon, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was literally on a train in the middle of Switzerland talking to somebody about what they did. They worked for charity, and I thought, that's what I want to do. So just this mad moment, and as fairy tale as that sounded, I got back to the UK. There was a recession, so it took me a couple of years to get there. So I did a lot of voluntary work before I actually got my first paid job. And I started off in a very small organisation called the Stroke Association over in the UK. I was living in Cardiff at the time because that's where I was at college, and I went back there to live with the ex-college friends, and they this charity needed a Welsh branch of fundraising, which they'd never had before. And so they gave it to this English woman. And basically...
What could go wrong?
Exactly. They basically said to me, look, we've never had fundraising in Wales before. Head office is in London. Get yourself a rent, get yourself some volunteers, and away you go. So kind of similar. Like, I feel very supportive. When I look back, I think what a risk they were taking. I was in my 20s at the time. I then moved to the NSPCC. I did that for a couple of years. I moved to the NSPCC, and then I found myself one of 250 fundraisers in the organisation spread across the country. So I went from being the lone fundraiser surrounded by volunteers to being in this massive organisation with 250 fundraisers. I then moved over to Ireland because my husband got a job over here. We came for 2 years in the year 2001. So go figure where those 2 years have gone. While I was here, I took a career break, but then joined the Bernardo's team. They at the time were quite small. They didn't have an events fundraiser, and that's really what I specialized in at the time. So I worked with them for a number of years, and then worked with them as a consultant fundraiser. So I did kind of outsourced consultancy, and then scroll on a few years later, I then joined the Irish Hospice Foundation because they needed somebody to do a 3-month study on the IFSC and corporate fundraising. And this is a pattern in my life. 9 years later, I'm still here. And I now head up the team. So there you go, potted history. I feel like I'm in a job interview. There you go. But basically, that's me.
I think that is it.
Yeah.
Isn't it that though? It's so many of our stories are like these little short term. Oh, I'll give it a go for a little while, and then you're like, where did 5 years go? You just
absolutely
fall in love with the project, with the cause, whatever, or the daft idea that you had, and you're like, well, I better see it through now. I've come up with the idea. So it's funny like that. Sinead, what's your story?
Well, I started my career as a designer in Waterford Crystal, so don't ask me how I ended up as a head of fundraising in a disability organisation. But I suppose really, like, it's a bit like fundraising. I was asked. So I spent 14 years working in Waterford. I was 7 years a designer and 7 years public relations manager. And in that, I managed a lot of our sponsorship budget, and I would have met a lot of charities because we were quite a generous company. And I was, Waterford went into receivership, and nearly everybody was made redundant. There was only about 50 or 60 people kept on down in Waterford. And I was sitting watching Coronation Street one evening, and Susan O'Dwyer, the CEO, Make-A-Wish, she just started as CEO there. Well, she was development manager beforehand. And she said, Sinead, I want you to do a little bit, like yourself, want to do a little bit of a project, like, Oh, I said, yeah, I'd be happy. I thought she wanted me to volunteer, And she said, no, I want to come up to Dublin. So anyway, I spent a year there. At the time, I was also doing a postgrad in marketing and management. And I said, oh, I'll give this a year. And I went and got a big job, massive budget, marketing wise in Ladbrokes. And after 2.5 years, I was like, just can't do this. It was 24/7, and like my heart wasn't in it. I'd been working for the most magical cause, and then it was like working on the other end of the spectrum for the devil himself. So I went back to Make-A-Wish, and after a couple of years, I promised her I'd stay there for a few years, and we really built an empire of corporate partnerships. Was flipping amazing in the middle of the recession, the work we did, and a lot of it was also down to the fact that we asked, had the courage, were fearless in the way we did it. We punched above our weight. And then I moved to Troker because I said, well, I'm going to work for a small charity. I want to see what it's like to work for a big charity. And that is the most amazing cause, the most amazing fundraising machine. Every aspect of the fundraising mix is best in class. So I got the opportunity to do basically a PhD in fundraising by working for Troker for 5.5 years. And like the same old story happened again a year and a half ago. Got a phone call. I was asked, went for an interview, said, oh, this sounds interesting. And now I'm the head of fundraising. And I started with no team, because the team and the whole strategy for IWA changed and evolved during COVID, and a whole brand new team has now emerged, and there are 5 of us, and it's wonderful because there is this real sort of spirit of entrepreneurialism, of let's try it, let's pilot it, let's learn from it, and then we just have this amazing database as well that we can tap into and evolve and continue to tell our story. So yes, it's just a love affair with being asked, I think.
I think sometimes actually, and the types of organizations like IWA, like it's only when you actually, and as a consultant being brought into organizations, it's like that's the privilege I get, is like when you get to learn how big and how like the reach is of so many doors. It's only when you actually sit talking to people and you're like, you serve how many people, like you work with, like, and you're everywhere, and it's
2,000 staff.
Like they're
Phenomenal.
mind-boggling kind of, and then you're like, oh, the opportunities.
Yeah.
It's like you just start rubbing your hands and go, okay, we can make
the
this
brain
work.
goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Frances, how did you end up in the volunteer centre?
Well, so my story starts on the dark side. Well, you probably saw
that could be anywhere.
Yeah, Bank of Ireland. Yeah, so out of college, I sort of studied business and communications and marketing. So I started Bank of Ireland and then moved kind of into construction area, so Crown Paints, that kind of area. But kind of similar to what Sinead was saying, I just happened to be in a company just before the economic crash around 2007, and there was a lot of layoffs, a lot of people being let go. They were closing down our warehouse, and they were kind of moving the head office to London and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on. It was just a small team of us left who were kind of this satellite. It's awful. It's just the most awful experience going through that and just seeing people leave. They've been working there for 30 or 40 years. And it was traumatic. So yeah, so I think having gone through that, I was like, what am I doing? So I decided to hand in my notice and just head off traveling. I just wanted to kind of just not be there and go and kind of do something. I'd never traveled after college, so I did that. And then that kind of gave me some ideas. Well, maybe I could do something different. So that led me then to kind of go into Africa for a year to do some overseas aid with the HIV and AIDS program. So when I came back from that, then I was like, well, I can't go back now to, the corporate side. So kind of using some of the skills and experience that I had built up, I worked for an organization called Kamara Education. So they, you probably know them, refurbish computers and send them out to Africa for schools and stuff. So that was great. And then from then I moved into the volunteer centre, but I'm there 8 years now. But it was great because I think I'm supporting organizations. So I kind of, having worked in Kamara and a lot of different other kind of organizations and seen the CSR side and that kind of thing, that kind of helps me now in my role with helping community organizations.
To be able to see both sides, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite good. Nice mixture.
I have to admit that I worked in Bank of Ireland too. I was like, after my failed physics degree, which is a whole other story, I was working in Bank of Ireland and I was so miserable I was there for maybe 2 years, and it was so miserable that my friends made it their New Year's resolution to get me a new job. So they all started just sending me job applications until eventually it was like, it shows how miserable I was. And then and actually I tumbled from there straight into the nonprofit sector in DCU doing events management, and just God knows it's 20 odd years now since then. But maybe Bank of Ireland is to thank for it all. Maybe that's
good starting point. Yeah,
it is. Or a good exit point. It's a good way to show you that you really don't want that. How about you, Carrie?
I'll see your Bank of Ireland and corporate banking and go, you want better. I worked for an American consultancy in the international office in London. We advised the banks what to do. So if it wasn't Bank of Ireland now, but definitely we were, it's such a different world. It's advising banks, you need to lay off staff, you need to close this many branches, and that was back in, I started work there in 1997, straight out of school actually, with no higher education at that time, and studied at night school, qualified in accountancy. 10 years I was there, and it is good, but it's soulless. You are working, you're putting in 80-hour weeks for the man. And I just thought, why am I doing this? Like, why am I wasting the best part of my 20s? And then I got an offer. My family's from Fermanagh, which is where I'm based, and to run and be the manager for a women's centre. And women's rights is really one of my core issues, and one of the things that will always get my goat up, I must say. You guarantee to get a response from me on that stuff. And I thought, do you know what? Why don't I? I can afford to try and buy a house there at least, and let's give it a go. And again, 8 years I was there. And that was with grassroots women from all walks of life. But it was at that time in Northern Ireland, and I'm not sure if anyone here has ever had to do cross-border work, there was a lot of cross-border funding. I'm sure everybody down in Dublin was thinking, oh, would you look at them with antic philanthropies and the island funds and peace money coming through. So heavily funded out of Europe for a good 8 years there, which meant putting women through for everything from education to driving lessons, actually. So there's 400 women. And Fermanagh is a strangely shaped county, so someone from the south of the county would never cross paths with someone from the north of the county. And depending on what your religion is, you might not have crossed the border anyway. So it was a lot of that type of work. And I mean, from the fundraising perspective, it was all managing fundraising applications, but you had your raffles, you had your membership schemes, so they'd be dropping money in envelopes, and you had volunteers to help count that. From there, I went to I had my son, and I've worked remotely actually since around 2015. So working remotely wasn't new to me in the pandemic, and it must have been very tough for everybody in the fundraisers that hadn't done it before, because it is hard, isn't it, to connect with people and to do the asks remotely. I worked for a UK charity, a huge charity called Action Medical Research. Like Sinead said, when you enter these big machines, all the stuff you fought for years is just handed to you in your induction pack. Like, oh wow, right, okay. And there's 2 legacy officers, and there's 2 of these, and it really is, like I say, it's best in class. They're an events fundraising charity, and I was their manager for Northern Ireland. It was just events and managing the committees. Again, trial by fire for to learn that stuff. And I always say, one of my catchphrases at the office is, you have to do a gig to know a gig, and that's true with events. And anyone that's watching this now, it's doing a local event, we're all in the same boat when it comes to putting up sale banners and stuff. There's no glamour at either end of that scale. And I loved it. I really loved it. That post naturally came to an end, and I worked for the South East Fermanagh Foundation, which is a cause that supports people who have been through with troubles in Northern Ireland, so paramilitaries who've been injured with physical therapy from both sides of the communities. And again, it's a tough cause, and it's tough to fundraise, so these things often get heavy trust fundraising. But we had to go in a bit of an individual giving program, trying to promote events. And then, and it's like that thing, a friend of a friend had sent me this and said, I think this might be right up your street, this organisation down in Dublin called Sparasi. And I still encounter this to this day. I had never heard of our organisation. I was not aware that there were people in Ireland who had been tortured, and I didn't know what they were about at all. And I do love a challenge, and it's just as well I do. Because I got to meet them, got to know them. And I think even if you're not a human rights activist, I think you can do some of those stories well, and you're well versed in your messaging and what you have to do. And again, I liked the challenge of trying to grow some of the pieces that we've been lucky enough to kind of grow. I would always say that I fell into fundraising, and I think a lot of us all say that, don't we? You know, apart from Helen, which sounds like a career move, but then, you know, it sounds like I was going to do that, but you never intend to stay 10 years, or you never, you know, you take on this short contract with people you like working with, and then you're there for a real, you know, long length of time. So I still feel like I'm finding my way. I still feel like I learn something every few months, and it all changes. And when I've got a handle on something else will change, you know, but that's now what you have to learn to love about the job.
Yeah, I think it's the same for every, and exactly as you say, like the smallest community groups, whether they're tiny towns or whether they're the big national organizations, it is full of people who just like a challenge and get stuck into something, and all of a sudden years have gone by and they look back and go, look what we've achieved, and they spend the whole time not feeling like they're getting anywhere, but it's only in the rearview mirror actually look back and go, wow, actually that was quite a ride, that was quite a journey. And I think it's I hope people hear from you guys that it's okay not to be quite sure what's the right decision, and is this the right idea, is this the right activity, is this the right event, and where are we going to go with this. That it is all about learning on the journey, and actually kind of, you know, we try that, we learn that, we jump into a new role, and we've never done an event before, and we're able to just kind of go, well, we'll give it a go. We'll make a mess with the first 3 times, but the 4th time will be brilliant. I'm sure that'll be worth it completely. But that's really good. Scott, I'm just getting all these flashbacks of my own career, and I think I don't want to. I feel like I need therapy now all of a sudden, but that's a whole other thing. Okay, this is just for fun. I really want to hear what the biggest mistake that you've ever made in your fundraising careers, and I'm happy to start off. And
I think we've only got a half an hour, so I don't know if we have long enough.
Only one mistake.
I
I very distinctly remember, and I don't remember what the mailing was for. I can't remember what the mailing was for, but I pulled a mailing off our database, and whatever mistake I made through lack of knowledge and lack of asking someone else for a bit of help and trying to do it myself, I wrote out to 300 dead people, who were all people that our organization had nursed. So we knew they were dead. And obviously Helen is probably grimacing straight away, because that's the exact time, because it was with the Cancer Society at the time. And and then I had to, so then I was having to go to my boss and say, well, this is what's happened. And obviously after her a few expletives of, not really at me, she was quite supportive, because she was like, well, you've owned up to it. And her answer was, well, you're going to take all the calls. And we had to write out and apologize, and we had some very horrible phone calls. But you know, we learn and we make mistakes, and I think I've always felt strength in those kind of things. Those kind of, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, I'll say sorry. Like, I don't mean to make mistakes, you know, but I make them, and I'll say sorry, and I'll try not to do them again. I think we hold ourselves back so much sometimes for fear of that. And when you've really upset some poor family who've lost their mother, like, you know, you kind of go, it's pretty low, kind of, I can't do anything that bad again, I hope. So that was the biggest one, or certainly the one I felt the worst about, I think, over the years. We'll go to first. Frances, have you had any major boo-boos over the years?
I'm just trying to think. I can't think of anything.
You're just too good.
Well, it's not. No, definitely not. But like most organizations that we would support need volunteers to help with fundraising in some shape or form at some stage during the year, you know. So I have had a few, disasters on behalf of the organization. Like, so we'd advertise for volunteers, and they would think that they have these 8 volunteers are going to turn up at Blanchardstown Shopping Centre, you know, at a particular time to fundraise for the day, and they're there, and there's no volunteers don't turn up. So then they kind of come back to me, and I always feel responsible then. I kind of feel, oh my God, like what? How did that happen? You know?
Yeah.
And then when you dig down, you find, okay, the communication wasn't there. Something was missed. People got the wrong time, or maybe they felt, because I know from feedback we get from volunteers, they really appreciate being told, you know, what's happening, when do I have to turn up, a little bit about the organisation, you know, what, just stuff. And if that's not there and missing, then they just might feel, oh, okay, you know, I'm not valued, so I'm not going to turn up. So I think sometimes there's a little bit of a lost in translation between what the organisation thinks is going to happen and what the volunteer thinks is happening. And then it's just from experience, then you know the next time, okay, I'm going to make sure I don't let that happen again. We're going to make sure everybody knows. I'm going to follow up with a phone call the night before, and I'm going to text people in the morning just to make sure they know what entrances is, where we're meeting, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Actually, that brings up back a point that I always try and again talk to organizations about, is like, no one else is in your bubble, so you assume that people know exactly what you're, even when you talk about, oh, we'll send you bibs and buckets, half the people are like, I don't know what that means. Like, we assume because we're in, like, you know, what with that, everyone completely understands what they're going, and of course they'll be there, they got the email. But you're right, sometimes I actually need to go, well, you're going to have to go, and this is the bus you get to the shopping center or whatever, and it's like, someone will meet you there and they'll explain everything, don't worry, here's, and some, again, we do have to always remember that we're in a bubble, and the often our volunteers, our donors, whoever it is, or even just people who are going to turn up at your table quiz, they're not in your world, and it might be them, you know, being pushed out of their comfort zone, and it's thinking of what would I feel like if I had to turn up at that event, or if I had to turn up to shake buckets, and would I feel well supported? So it's kind of good that you bring that up. Sinead, time to dob yourself in.
I make mistakes every day, all the time, like genuinely, and I create a culture of acceptance around mistakes, because I actually think it's really essential part of particularly being a head of fundraising, because it's not a perfect science. It's a combination of the art of storytelling, the science of data, the science of sales, for the want of a better word, and it's about the marketing mix. It's about what are the products that you're going to put in front of your donors to engage them. I suppose the biggest mistake I made was leaving Make-A-Wish after a year, going into Ladbrokes, but at least I got the opportunity to come back. So I mustn't have done something that wrong that they were prepared to take me back. But I have to say, yeah, I think actually to embrace mistakes is actually really, really healthy thing to do as a fundraiser, because yeah, I think it's unless you're in a situation like where you have absolutely amazing data and super budgets to create brilliant campaigns, you've got to be prepared to do trial and error, and I would say that's just part of life, and yeah, that would be my response to that question. So it didn't get really personal, but I did own up to that one.
We'll call your team later and see what they think.
Yeah, exactly. God, I hope they feel that is what because I say it. I hope I make them feel that, you know.
They'll say that there's a culture where she can make mistakes, we're not allowed. But actually, that's a really good point, and that whole testing that, and again, particularly when you're in a smaller organization and you're doing your first event or you're doing your first mailing just around your town or whatever, you have to have that in your head that it might be a disaster and that's okay, that you don't know. And what I was trying to say to people is like, well, okay, so you might be trying to raise €5,000 from your day, but what other measurables can you set targets for? So at least if the money doesn't come in, you can have your volunteer plan written, so you know that for the next thing, or that you can get the right number of attendances, or whatever happens to you. If you set at least other milestones so that you're not putting everything on the one, just the money figure, so that if you feel confident to go, okay, well, we'll give it a go, and sure, if we only have €3,000 come in, at least we'll learn how to manage event. At least we'll have done a safety plan. At least we'll have got some social media traffic, and we'll have learned, and we'll be able to reflect back afterwards and go, well, we hit 3 milestones, we missed 3 milestones, now we know we're better. So I think it's really important to not be afraid to be embarrassed. Like, I mean, we've all sat at venues or events and kind of going, there's a lot less people here than I thought was going to be here, and I'm just going to have to smile and pretend it's exactly the way I hoped it would be, and write it out. And that's the fun of the industry. Carrie, what have you got to tell us?
Oh, loads. I'm like Sinead. I make mistakes every day. I think when you are juggling so many things, stuff is going to get missed. You do get to this level of acceptance, and I definitely do that with my team. And I am only human, and I think that's really important too. If you're on a committee and you're doing an event, it can be a very lonely place. So don't feel that you can't ever admit to it, and don't ever hold that back, especially if you're in an informal setting. But then when you're paid to do it, I suppose it's different. You shouldn't be making the mistakes. I've absolutely, organised it. It was one Saturday we were doing a sort of cross-border bus trip somewhere. I just totally forgot to tell the caterer, whom I'd booked to do catering for at some point on some date, but I'd forgotten to confirm. I had booked it and hadn't sent the confirmation. So packed up, 60 women on a bus to Ballybuffet without so much as a sausage sandwich, and that was part of the deal. I do believe in breaking bread, and it really helps. And it was, it was commented on, and you just have that heart-stopping moment. You think, I completely missed that. I just completely missed it, But to admit it and be honest is always a good thing. And I think as well with funding applications, and like in Ireland, there is a couple of databases, but they're not complete and they're not succinct, and sometimes they're not up to date. And there's not many of them compared to the UK, where I've worked and applied for loads of grants, where you're talking hundreds. So I've definitely thought in my head, oh, do you know what? That comes up around October. No, it didn't, Carrie. It was on the 1st of September. Unless it's in my diary, you do miss it. And again, I think it can depend on who you're working with, your team, your board, your group. If you're in an organisation you can't feel free to own up to those things. It makes it very, very difficult. Whereas I'm lucky with Sprassi and my team. We're very honest. We'll be the first to say, oh no, that was me, and admit to it. And I think it takes the sting out of it just slightly.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Helen.
Okay, thank you. This is going to sound like echoing a theme, really, because look, one of the hats that I've had to play and had to kind of assume over the years has been when I've worked for charities that don't have an HR department or an HR support. So, you find yourself then in this great world of fundraising and all the things that you've talked about. You need to be on top of your data, and you need to be an events person, and you need to be great at public speaking, blah, 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 blah. But suddenly you find yourself in recruitment and HR issues. And I think if I look back at some of the biggest mistakes I've made, probably would have been around where I've assumed, yeah, I can take that role on too. And I've ended up, and I can say this now because I have a wonderful, wonderful team, and our staff retention rate is very high, and we've held together during these mad COVID times. So it's working really well now. But when I look back over the many years of fundraising, there has been the times I've made a mistake where I've taken on the wrong person for the wrong role, or within the team felt this person would love to develop their event skills. And they're no more an events person than the man in the moon. But I felt, they want to thrive at this, when actually they're probably a data head or a legacy person or a trust and foundations application type person, and probably doesn't want to be in a field in the rain, geeing on the crowds. And those are the kind of mistakes I've made. The wrong person to the wrong role, or sometimes along the recruitment journey, maybe just not listened to my head as much as my heart in the interviewing process. And I think that then becomes an issue that, you have to work through, and you just have to learn that skill of building the best team around you and upskilling people to do the best that they can in the areas they want to, whilst also pushing them along to reach targets. So long answer, I'm afraid, but it's
that's a good answer. And God, everyone keeps sparking other thoughts in me, but it actually makes me think, because I was just reflecting with another head of fundraising there earlier in the week. I think one thing that, and I see it from, again, voluntary committees and right the way up to the national organizations, I think it's related to that fear thing, and it's related to our passion for our causes, is that we're not good at asking for help. and we want, and we feel often the responsibility that I have to do it all because the cause is so important, it has to be done right. We often aren't willing to kind of go, actually, I've got too much to do. I need to ask, you know, my fellow committee member or for someone else, or just say, no, we can't. And then we make mistakes because we're juggling 10 balls at the same time. And I think, again, so a piece of advice I like to give to those smaller community groups is actually, you know what, you can't do it all. And sometimes it's okay to say, no, we're not going to do that. We don't have the time, or someone else needs to help me. I don't have that skills, because we're not doing a disservice to the organization by not doing it. We're not doing the best for the organization by not, you know what I mean? We have to actually ask. We have to bring more people in, and it's why we seek volunteers. It's why we want people to organize events, is because we can't do it all, and that's how our organizations get stronger. And that fear sometimes makes us hold on too tight, or well, I think anyway. Okay, we'll last question, and then we'll let everybody go. And look, I can't wait to hear what people think of this conversation, because I've really enjoyed it. So just thinking again of all the community groups, and I've had the privilege of meeting so many of them this week, from small migrant support groups to say organizations that are trying to change the face of our whole country. It's just been really inspiring and stuff, but so many of them are one or two person led, or they might have a couple of staff, or they might be completely voluntary. So from a fundraising point of view, what would the one piece of advice that you could give from what we've probably got 60 years experience on the call at the moment or more. So what's the one piece of advice that I guess you wish someone had said to you when you were starting off, that you kind of go, oh God, if I'd known that when I was, when I was baby me, and that would help me a lot. Who's got the answer on the tip of their tongue and is happy to jump in?
I will. I mean, I wish someone had said to me, have a bit of agency about what you can do and what your workload is and how much it should be expected. I think the world of fundraising changes in every 2 or 3 years, if I'm honest. It's changed wildly in 5 years, 10 years. We've all got to be experts in digital, and unless you just happen to have worked in tech, you're not. And if there's a small group out there who's thinking, oh, we'll do a fortune through Facebook, not without significant money to spend and a lot of time on it, even with a young person posting every day, it's actually, it turns into a real vehicle that you have to know how to manage. And I wish, you're so right in what you just said, Kevin, if you can choose 2 things that even your group is going to focus on together and do really well, I think to the person you're trying to market that to, so let's say it's a major donor or a Lidl down the road, or the GAA club or a football club, it will look like you're cohesive, you're strong, you've got your messaging together, you've got your project, a bit of a project. I think people get scared by the word about a project, and I know that we touched on this in one of the videos, Kevin, this week. If you're at home cooking dinner, doing homework with a toddler hanging off your leg, and you've got your sister's texting you on your mobile, and you want to make a cup of tea, you're already doing a project. You're already managing 10 strands of things going on. And really what we do sometimes is not all that different. It's just maybe written down and it's on paper with a few aims and objectives and an output. And I think keeping it simple and really focused is often a great help to stop everybody getting a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Anybody else? Any nuggets of advice?
Yeah, I think going back to when I worked for a smaller organization, the Lone Fundraiser, and now there's 8 in our team in total, which sounds quite big, but we are incredibly stretched at times. I think sometimes it's having belief in what you're doing. And sometimes, I mean, I know we all want to network and we want to listen and we all want to know what's going on in the big world of fundraising, but sometimes you can be pulled in a direction because you feel, well, if I don't take the charity down that road, we're going to miss out some way. And you may get board members or, other managers saying, blah, charity is doing this. Why aren't you doing it? And,
everyone's a fundraiser.
And sometimes those nuggets of information are fantastic, but sometimes, most of the time, if I'm honest, there's a certain amount of eye rolling and politely smiling because you think, well, we're not doing that because I've got a plan for the year and I don't just turn on a whim as much as I want to be innovative and fluid and all those things. we have a plan, we have a structure. I know what my staff are doing, my team know what they're doing, we know what we're spending, we know what our target is. So it's to have faith in that and the journey that you're on, and the people around you who are coming in with these great ideas and this mailing that they received yesterday from some charity that invests millions in that sphere. That person is trying to do their best for you. So you see it with the best will in the world, but don't get spooked by it. If you're a plan and you know your stuff and you're on that course, if there's something like digital or something like that can come along, you can learn it, you can get there, but you don't need to feel, well, if I don't do it now, tomorrow it'll be gone. It'll be, and I've missed out and I've done something. And you can see in fundraising, there's often trends. So before the pandemic, there's a lot of talk about legacy fundraising. I was at an international fundraising conference, and so global charities were talking about the importance of legacy, and that was filtering down here. And there was this big mad rush of like, we've got to have a legacy pack, and we've got to do legacy work, which a lot of charities do need to have, but not now, right this minute. Not at the expense of all the good work that you've nearly got over the edge and that you're nearly there with. So I think there is that. And I know we juggle loads of balls, and I know we have to do that, but just sometimes remind yourself that you set out to do something because you knew it was the right thing, and have faith and confidence in yourself and your team. You'll get there.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's that rush, and it's great to just think yourself, we want to get this done in 2 years, but if it takes 3 and we do it right, what difference does it make? It's more important to get it done. And it's that kind of panic and just the confidence to say, no, we're going to take our time, we're going to be methodical, we're going to have our plan, and just step by step, and we will get there. Because we're determined to get there. We've decided we're going to get there, and not to waver from that course. I think that's really useful.
I have the privilege of volunteering for the last 4 or 5 years on the board of the Meath Women's Refuge, and we've doubled our income in that time. And it goes back to Helen's point about making assumptions about staff, but also making assumptions about your income and where your income's coming from. And when the first in the refuge, when I started, was I sat down with the team and we looked at all where her income was coming from, who the donors were, and about 40% of that income was coming from individuals and some companies. And I asked a very simple question. I said, so what have you done to follow up with them? Have you met them? Have you gotten the opportunity to thank them? And I think we all probably
know the answer.
The answer to that. And with that one change in activity, in terms of, because there would have been a lot of energy, a lot of drama put around the bucket shaking, the bag packs, the luncheons, the things that take a lot of effort, that are brilliant for raising awareness, but often where your major donors are or where your corporates are, if you can just put a little bit of effort into those, they can be your sustainable donors. And that would be the advice that I would give to any small organization, is to look at those, make sure that you're monitoring your grants and you're giving your grantors reports, photographs. It doesn't have to be like the Gettysburg Address. It can be just a newspaper article or a quote or an update on the number of calls that you took that month in the service. Whatever it is, it's just about staying in touch with your donors, and that would be the advice that I would give to any kind of organization that's hoping to grow, because I've seen like income without me necessarily having to roll up my sleeves too much, just by having that conversation and looking at the sources of income. So don't make assumptions about where your income's coming from, and make sure that you focus your efforts on where the money is actually coming from.
Oh yeah, good donor care and good fundraising practice beats a great idea any day of the week. Because that's guaranteed. That will look after people, and they look after you. The great ideas are hit and miss. So that's really, really useful. Frances, and you're probably seeing all of the mistakes that organizations are making all the time. So what advice would you probably give to us based from your experience?
Yeah, one big thing I suppose that comes up a lot is when you're recruiting for volunteers and you have your lovely adverts ready and you're putting them out, is to try actually avoid the word fundraiser or book a collector, because especially on iVol, people don't search for that. They want to volunteer and help a cause that they really care about. So I think I would always encourage organizations to actually focus on what it is they're trying to do, get that message across, whether it's in the first couple of lines of the advert or even in the title. So instead of saying book a collector, like Daffodil Day volunteer, or there was a mental health organization and they were trying to get fundraisers and they weren't getting any applications, by just changing the title to lend a hand to mental health reform, volunteers required. Suddenly they got this influx of volunteers, because it's just a small little change where people are actually clicking on and reading the advert and going, oh, okay, yeah, well, I'm really, passionate about this cause and I want to help out. Oh, what is it I'll be doing? I'm going to be standing, giving out information or shaking a bucket or getting involved. That's fine. But I think if they just see book a collector or fundraiser or fundraising committee member, they might just bypass that advert and click onto something else. But I think it's about connecting with the cause and linking with people who actually want to get involved with you because they're passionate about what you're doing. That's probably the one thing.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks. I think we have certainly given enough advice and stuff, and I really think that it's great to hear that from all of your experience in all different organizations, to hear that you really are facing the exact same issues that tidy towns committees are facing, that small migrant groups are facing, that arts organizations are facing, and that the advice is really clear. It's don't panic, don't get really stressed, put a plan in place, take your time, do the best you can, and if you make a mistake, dust yourself off and try again, and you will get there. And it doesn't matter whether you're bringing in millions of euro or whether you're looking for 5,000 euro. It's the same practice. It's hard work, but the reward is in the results that you get at the end of it. So with that, I really want to thank Sinead, Helen, Francis, and Carrie for spending this hour with us and sharing so much of your expertise with us. I do want to thank Ruth from the Dublin City PPN for pulling this whole week together and for getting us all on a call and doing so much for all of the organizations around Dublin City. It's been a great initiative. And with that, we will end our Dublin City Festival of Fundraising. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank